So very good morning. Today we are going to discuss the concept of risk and return. How to measure risk and what is the risk-return relationship. So in every organization, the financial decisions are to be taken. The whole financial decision goes around between the risk and return. So decision making of any kind involves both positive and negative details. So what we understand is an investor will try to see what is the risk involved in a particular investment process and what is the return that is bearing on each of the investment portfolio. So we understand there is an expectation and there is something which we call it as reality. So there is interplay of many variables. Okay. So the key variables can be many, but in order to understand the concept of risk, so here I am going to write the meaning of risk. Risk is understood as the possibility of adverse happening. So in every field there is a risk. The risk may be high, the risk may be low, the risk may be moderate. So we understand the risk as the possibility of adverse happening. So we consider different situations as risky. So they involve larger deviations from what is actually expected. Whether a particular situation involves risk or not depends on what precision we can estimate the possibility of occurrence of a particular event. Now, we understand there are three possibilities. One is certainty. One is certainty. Okay. And second one is uncertainty. Third one is risk. So here there is another uncertainty. Risk, certainty, uncertainty and risk. Now, we understand the meaning of certainty and uncertainty because we already understood the concept of risk. Certainty is a situation which is reflecting the happening of a particular event as expected with zero deviation. That means we know what is going to happen and there is no change from what we are thinking and what is happening. So in case of certain situations, there will be no deviation at all. Now, let us take an example. The sun is rising in the east. That means there is certainty. So there may be some business situations which will be involving near certainty. Okay. And some people will be selling certain number of bags of rice in a particular location. And that is going to be certain. And next concept is uncertainty. Uncertainty is a situation that makes prediction difficult. One may not be sure of the occurrence of a particular event with any degree of precision. People find it very difficult to make predictions relating to weather. Similarly, the meteorological department sometimes may not be sure. Sometimes they say it's going to rain today, but it may not rain. So, to attempt to define uncertainty with any rigor presents extremely complex and hazardous conceptual and mathematical problems. So, whatever the state of possibilities that we have, it is said to be a situation lying between two stages. One is certainty, second is uncertainty. Okay. So, now we understand if we have a certainty and uncertainty, two different situations, when we understand from investment point of view, the statistical terminology says risk is referred to be a situation in which future outcomes are known. In other words, it is said to be as a dispersion in a subjective probability distribution. Okay. Now, we have concept of return. Okay. Now, we understood about risk. Now, we will be understanding about return. Now, what is return? Return is something received back. Okay. In the field of financial decision making, the manager invests the company's money in different assets and expects something back out of his investment. This is said to be a return. So, return has several dimensions. We call it as single period return. Single period return. We may also call, based on the period, multi-period return. Multi-period return. And we also say expected return and actual return. Okay. We also have ex ante return and ex post return. Ex ante return is anything which is expected. Ex post return means anything which is realized. Okay. So, depending upon the type of investment, type of security, we have security return and we also have portfolio return. There are different types of returns. Now, we again understand return is anything which is received back. Okay. Now, if we have to talk about a single period return, so it is a return which is always computed with reference to a particular period. Say, we are going to invest a certain amount in the form of a fixed deposit in a bank. We may receive the amount of interest either for a period of 30 days or a period of 90 days or a period of 180 days, or sometimes we may have to invest for 1 year period. So, when we are investing in these different periods, we may receive certain amount in the form of return, which we call it as a single period return. Now, what is going to be the rate of interest? The amount of rate of interest depends upon the period in which we are investing. So, the rates of return are computed on periodical basis. Suppose if there is a return which is expected as 12% per annum, we may have to calculate the return periodically, say 30 days, 90 days, 180 days or 365 days. So, if we are calculating the interest for 365 days, it is going to be 12%. Now, if we are calculating periodically, the rate of interest, amount of interest will be varying because of the period. So, return on investment will be earned during a class interval of a period, which may or may not be the same as the time period specifies the rate of return. Investors would be curious to know what rate of return they will be able to make irrespective of whether they make it during the calendar period or any other period. That means over and above the calendar period, 1 year period. So, the return on investment can be calculated on the basis of certain formulae. Okay. Now, if we have to calculate the rate of return or expected return, we may have to say that there is certain probability. So we generally denote the return either in the form of small letter a or capital letter R. Capital letter R or small letter r. Okay. If we say a, annual return, or if we say r, it is the return. Okay. Now, what is the return that we are going to calculate in case of expected return? So we understand expected return is the weighted average of possible returns where the weights represent the probabilities of occurrence. Okay. So expected return is the weighted average of possible returns where the weights represent the probability of occurrence. Now, how do we denote the return, expected return? Expected return is equal to sum of return on investment I multiplied by the probability on investment I. Okay. So whenever we are calculating expected return, it is the weighted average of possible returns where the weights represent the probabilities of occurrence. Similarly, we calculate the standard deviation. Okay. What is standard deviation? Standard deviation is a statistical measure of the variability of a distribution around the most likely expected return on an investment. So, it is the square root of the variance. Okay. Now, I will be writing what standard deviation is. Standard deviation is a statistical measure of the variability of a distribution around the most likely expected return on an investment. Okay. So, standard deviation is the square root of variance. Okay. Now, here, in order to say, we may have to call it as standard deviation is equal to square root of summation of, I put within brackets, return on investment I minus average returns of I should be multiplied with probability. Okay. So, when we calculate the standard deviation, it measures the risk. Similarly, we may also have to calculate the coefficient of variation. Now, let us understand the concept of coefficient of variation.